On September 20th, 2023, agents at Dulles International Airport, just outside Washington, D.C., intercepted a man attempting to board a flight to Zambia. His name was Hachikosela Muchimba, a 45-year-old U.S. Postal Service letter carrier from the Friendship Heights neighborhood of Washington. In his bag, agents found cash. On his record, investigators carried evidence of a far larger crime, the theft of over $1.6 million in checks from the U.S. mail. For years, neighbors had trusted him with their livelihoods in sealed envelopes. That day, the uniform of trust became the symbol of betrayal. What followed was not just the unraveling of a financial crime, but the complete undoing of a man's identity, ending with the stripping of his U.S. citizenship. Muchimba's story began in Zambia. Like many who leave their homeland, he came to the United States chasing opportunity. His journey was long, with hurdles both bureaucratic and personal. He worked ordinary jobs, saved, and built the kind of quiet life that so many immigrants piece together. When he found employment with the U.S. Postal Service, it seemed like validation. The USPS was not glamorous, but it was steady and symbolic. To be entrusted with people's mail meant being folded into the rhythms of American trust. Mail carriers walked the same streets every day, waved to the same families, and quietly kept communities stitched together. When he became a U.S. citizen, standing in a courthouse and taking the oath, the moment carried weight. He had crossed oceans, passed tests, and been granted the full rights and responsibilities of belonging. On paper and in spirit, he was now American. But citizenship is more than paperwork. It is a covenant of honesty. And as history would show, Muchimba would violate that covenant. The pandemic created chaos in everyday systems. Relief checks, unemployment benefits, and tax refunds all funneled through the mail. Billions of dollars traveled in plain envelopes. For many families, these checks meant survival. For criminals, they meant opportunity. For Muchimba, standing on the inside of the system, temptation was irresistible. He was the custodian of financial lifelines, holding in his hands envelopes thicker and heavier than usual, some stamped with the unmistakable Treasury seal. At first, perhaps it was just one check, small enough to go unnoticed, but enough to reveal the possibilities. Once he crossed that line, there was no turning back. From October 2021 through March 2023, he systematically stole checks from across 30 postal routes in Washington, D.C. Some checks were small, a few $100s. Others were massive, tens of thousands of dollars. Together, they totaled over $1.6 million. Muchimba's method relied on audacity more than complexity. He intercepted checks, forged or altered endorsements, and funneled them into accounts he controlled. Surveillance cameras later captured him in his USPS uniform depositing checks into ATMs. He recruited accomplices using their bank accounts to disguise the flow of stolen funds. The scheme produced lavish rewards. He traveled abroad, stayed in expensive hotels, and frequented nightclubs. His salary as a postal worker could never explain the sudden wealth, but greed has a way of distorting logic. As long as the money kept flowing, he may have believed he was untouchable. But every theft left a mark: an unpaid bill, a delayed refund, a frustrated citizen filing a complaint. The investigations began not with a dramatic revelation, but with everyday frustrations voiced by ordinary citizens. Residents of Washington, D.C., particularly those living along postal routes in Friendship Heights and surrounding neighborhoods, began reporting missing checks. Seniors complained to banks that their Social Security benefits had not arrived. Small businesses flagged delays in receiving client payments. Families awaiting unemployment checks or child support reported that funds had been issued but never reached their mailboxes. At first, these seemed like isolated incidents, an unfortunate but not unheard of risk within a vast postal system. But as complaints mounted, a pattern emerged. Many of the missing checks could be traced to the same delivery routes, and that pointed investigators in one direction: the postal worker responsible for those neighborhoods, Muchimba. The Office of Inspector General within the U.S. Postal Service began its inquiry. Using advanced tracking methods, they introduced decoy mail into Muchimba's delivery stream. These controlled envelopes marked for tracking mysteriously vanished under his watch. Simultaneously, Treasury investigators tracked fraudulent deposits into bank accounts. Video surveillance from ATMs showed Muchimba still wearing his USPS uniform, making deposits of stolen checks. Investigators also subpoenaed bank records, which revealed a troubling pattern. Accounts linked to Muchimba showed deposits of Treasury checks made payable to people on his routes. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was direct, observable, and damning. By the spring of 2023, Muchimba must have sensed the tightening noose. On March 29th, investigators executed a search warrant at his home, uncovering ATM receipts and documentation of check deposits worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. One receipt alone reflected a staggering deposit of more than $415,000, clearly inconsistent with his postal worker's salary. Despite the growing pressure, Muchimba tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, continuing his postal route while quietly planning his way out of the United States. In September 2023, his plan came into focus. Believing he could evade accountability by returning to Zambia, Muchimba booked an international flight. On September 20, 2023, he arrived at Dulles International Airport with luggage and cash, hoping to slip out of the country before charges caught up with him. But law enforcement had been monitoring his movements. Agents intercepted him at the airport, arresting him before he could board the plane. In his possession was cash for his escape, but investigators had far more incriminating baggage: years of surveillance, stolen checks, and a trail of fraud that spanned 30 delivery routes. His attempt to flee cemented the image of a man who knew he was guilty and sought refuge outside the jurisdiction of U.S. courts. Muchimba's trial unfolded in March 2025 in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Prosecutors presented a comprehensive case built on testimony, bank records, surveillance footage, and the decoy mail operation. Witnesses included victims who testified about the stress and hardship caused by the thefts. Seniors spoke about missed benefits. A local small business owner described nearly defaulting on supplier payments due to a stolen check. Prosecutors emphasized that the harm went far beyond dollar amounts. The thefts eroded trust in one of the nation's most respected public institutions. The charges were extensive conspiracy to commit mail theft and bank fraud, mail theft, bank fraud, money laundering, and unlawful procurement of citizenship. The jury deliberated but found the evidence overwhelming. On March 14, 2025, Muchimba was convicted on all counts. The verdict not only confirmed his guilt in the theft, but also revealed that he had lied during his naturalization process, concealing prior misconduct. This final revelation laid the groundwork for one of the most severe penalties possible: the revocation of his U.S. citizenship. On September 3, 2025, the courtroom filled again for sentencing. Judge Rudolph Contreras delivered a firm but measured statement before announcing the penalties. He noted that Muchimba had betrayed the trust not only of the individuals on his mail routes, but of the United States government itself. He explained that while financial restitution could offset some losses, no amount could restore the public trust that Muchimba's actions had damaged. "The Postal Service is built on reliability," Judge Contreras said, "and you turned that reliability into opportunity for personal gain. In doing so, you undermined an institution millions depend on." The sentence reflected the seriousness of those words. Muchimba was ordered to serve 66 months in federal prison. He was directed to pay $651,068.35 in restitution to compensate victims and to forfeit $1,273,403.36 in illicit gains. Most devastatingly, Judge Contreras upheld the government's request to revoke Muchimba's citizenship. The revocation was not symbolic. It stripped him of all the rights and protections associated with being an American citizen. The revocation of citizenship, known legally as denaturalization, is rare but permitted under U.S. law. According to the Immigration and Nationality Act, a naturalized citizen can lose their status if it is proven that they procured citizenship illegally or by willfully misrepresenting facts during the naturalization process. In Muchimba's case, prosecutors demonstrated that he concealed disqualifying criminal conduct when applying for citizenship. Because the law views citizenship obtained through fraud as invalid from the start, the court had the authority to revoke it. Judge Contreras stated plainly, citizenship is a privilege granted on the basis of truth. When that truth is absent, so too is the citizenship. Once stripped of his citizenship, Muchimba became subject to removal proceedings. After completing his prison sentence, he would face deportation back to Zambia. The courtroom also heard the voices of those harmed by his actions. Victims described not only financial losses, but emotional tolls. One elderly resident testified to months of anxiety after her Social Security check vanished, forcing her to borrow money to cover basic living expenses. A young couple recounted their struggle to pay rent after a stolen check delayed their landlord's payment. The judge acknowledged these stories in his remarks, stating that the ripple effects of Muchimba's crimes extended far beyond bank ledgers. The victims' hardships highlighted that this was not a faceless crime against an institution, but a betrayal that touched real lives. The final chapter of Muchimba's story is perhaps the most tragic. The very achievement that once marked his success, his U.S. citizenship, was taken from him. Years earlier, he had stood proudly in a courtroom, swearing allegiance to his adopted country. But that oath carried conditions of honesty, integrity, and lawful conduct. By lying during the process and later committing federal crimes, he voided that bond. His citizenship was declared null and void, retroactively illegitimate. He would not leave prison as an American, he would leave as a deportable alien. The lesson was stark. Citizenship is not a shield for wrongdoing, nor is it immune to revocation. The law is clear. Fraud in the process of becoming a citizen can unravel that status, no matter how much time has passed. What do you think about this case? Was justice served, or do you believe the punishment went too far? Share your perspective in the comments. We'd love to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.